Good evening, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Letlhogonolo Mokgoroane. I'm a co-founder of the Cheeky Natives. I was going to say welcome to another episode of the Cheeky Natives, but I remember that this is not the Cheeky Natives. This is actually the 20th reiteration of Time of the Writer, which is hosted by the University of KwaZulu-Natal. And everyone is in Durban having a wonderful time, and we are stuck here online. But today we're going to have a wonderful conversation, which is about queer representation in literature. And with me, I have two really wonderful writers who I'm going to give an opportunity to introduce themselves. I'll start with you, welcome. 26, sorry, thank you, 26.
Oh, yay. Thank you so much. I'm also really excited to be part of this conversation, and I love talking to Letlhogonolo, as always, talking books. And I'm also particularly excited to be talking to Alistair. Just a bit about me. I'm a freelance journalist, and I'm currently working on doing research on someone that is currently being channeled towards a musical Vogue opera that I'm working on with Philip Miller, and we're doing a campaign around the opera, which should premiere sometime later this year. So I'm really excited about that. Otherwise, I write travel stories and all sorts of writing, and I love baking. I make croissants from scratch as a fun thing.
And I mean, very important, the book that you've written, you need to just tell us what the title is.
Yes, most importantly. Yes, so my book is Boy on the Run, which is a memoir that came out last year on World Pride Day. And it's really a memoir about grief. Sorry about that. It's a memoir about grief, coming of age, and queer love and the kind of friendships that kept me going through the grief. Because when I was young, like 12 years old, I walked in on the tragic scene of my mom laying in a puddle of blood after having been shot by her boyfriend. And so Boy on the Run is about the escape and the longing to overcome that grief. And I do that through travel and friendships. And that's what Boy on the Run is essentially about, in a nutshell.
Thank you so much. Welcome. And next we have Alistair.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and to be chatting to you both. Letlhogonolo and welcome. My name is Alistair. I am also a freelance writer. I live in Cape Town, but I grew up in Joburg. My novel also came out last year. It's called It Doesn't Have to Be This Way. I think it's probably backwards because of the Zoom screen. It is a climate change novel set between the current day and the near future, and it follows three queer friends and their lives over the next 15 years as they try to make meaning and preserve their connections and preserve their friendships and their love as everything falls apart around them due to climate collapse. It helped me expunge a lot of my own anxiety, so I hope it's an enjoyable read.
Thank you so much. So I have the wonderful privilege of hosting and holding conversation between these two people, kind of like an interlocutor. So really probing so that they can tell us what's happening in their brilliant minds. But before I do that, I think it's really important, just as a start, to allow people to kind of get a taste of Boy on the Run, and it doesn't have to be this way. So welcome, what I'll ask you to do is, whatever resonates with you in terms of reading, just read us a few paragraphs to really get us in this Boy on the Run.
Okay. Let me find I should have done this earlier. But give me a second. Do you have a particular part you'd like me to read?
No, I mean, I'm giving you the autonomy to showcase your best, the best of Boy on the Run. I suppose while you do that, right, Alistair, may I ask you to perhaps start reading your passage while Cam finds a salacious thing to read to us?
Absolutely, Letlhogonolo. I wasn't sure. I didn't know that the brief was salacious. I feel like I've chosen the wrong passage, but it's very queer at least. So I'll read this section. It's from fairly early on in the book. One of the main characters, Lutando, is on his way to embark on some ecotourism, terrorism, not tourism. Right, there we go. Lutando's car is the first to approach the plant. He switches off the headlights about a kilometer before the main gate and turns the car off the tarred road and into the veld. They drive for a few minutes into the bush, rattling over rocks and scraping against sticks and thorn bushes. Lutando parks the car, turns off the engine. Outside, the night is silent. They wait for a security patrol to find them, dogs barking or torches moving along the perimeter of the power station. They wait for the second car to arrive. They do not speak. They need to be able to hear the faintest sounds, the first distant calls that someone has seen them. While they wait in the car, Lutando removes a small compact from his jeans pocket. Gold eyeshadow, the same shade Notolo had with her in that bar on Buitengracht Street all those months ago. He pulls down the sun visor, opens the flap of the mirror within it, and slowly, without a word, starts to apply the powder to his eyelids. It's barely visible in the dark, but it's not for the others that he's doing it. Even if they can't see a thing, he knows it's there. His armor, his glittering war paint. It'll sparkle in the light of the moon, perhaps. He's done enough hiding in the last few months, too afraid to go outside. He's done enough hiding from Viwe too. This mission, but also the way he has to rein in the gay for Viwe, dial back the femininity because it makes Viwe uncomfortable. He loves Viwe, truly, wholly. But as he watches his eyes in the rearview mirror, he loves who this person has become too. What the hell are you doing? Jeremy shout whispers from the seat behind him. Want some, Lutando says. He winks at Jeremy in the rearview mirror. Jeremy clicks his tongue in irritation. Let's go.
Thank you so much for that, Alistair. Welcome.
Yes, I'm looking for a queer part also. Oh, very queer. This is my first.
I mean, both books are very queer, just in their making, okay?
Doesn't need to be honest, I know. But this is from a hookup at my first year at university after I just arrived, and I'm meeting a guy for a hookup, and this is on page 91. This had to be the most dangerous thing I've ever done. Meeting a stranger in downtown Joburg to go to his place for sex. I was near Chicken Licken, but I was scared of even taking my phone out in case I got mugged. I heard it was dangerous here, yet here I was. It was not so much that I wanted to have sex. It was more that I hadn't done it that had pushed me here. I saw a guy in a black t-shirt. He looked at me shyly. My heart was racing. He was cuter than the picture promised. I glanced in his direction and looked the other way. The last thing I needed was to walk up to a random straight guy and ask if he was the one I was here to have sex with. Outside of being dangerous, it would communicate so much about my so-called morals. I stood near the door at Chicken Licken, took out my phone and texted, "I'm here, where are you?" It was a wild spot to take out your phone in Johannesburg. The cute guy took out his phone. He was reading and looking around. Surely this was a confirmation. I waved with a slight innocent smile, the kind you'd give a passing stranger on the street, except with my phone in hand. We started walking towards each other. Hi. My place is this way. Oh, did you get lost? No. How old did you say you are again? 22. I lied. I was actually 18, but he didn't need to know that. We got to his place and took the elevator. He was nervous, almost as nervous as I was, except he seemed so much more nervous about being seen than nervous about having sex. The elevator stopped on the 16th floor. We got off. He walked ahead of me and he got to the door. Did the moment start when he closed the door behind him, or was there a moment of being polite and proper? I wondered in my head. His apartment was very nice. The dishes were not done, but he still looked like a clean guy. His sheets, crockery, fridge, and his ironing board were all white. There was so much light coming in there. I hadn't seen Joburg from up there. It was quite something. I feel like I can go on, but I love that.
I love that. You're like, ooh, I'm 22, but he doesn't. I lie, but he doesn't.
He doesn't need to know that.
I wanted to kind of start. I think that while one book is non-fiction and the other one is fiction, I feel that there is a lot of like sameness and queerness. And I think the starting point for me is welcome. When you were talking about what Boy on the Run is, you essentially were saying that it's about like outrunning your grief, right? And yes. There is a part in your book, Alistair, where you know, one of the characters, as mom passes away. But I wanted to speak about the kind of juxtaposition of these relationships, right? So welcome, tell us a little bit about the relationship that you had with your mom, right? Pertaining particularly to your queerness and kind of just like how that was for you.
Oh yes. I mean, I've had a very beautiful relationship with my mother, whom from a very young age had been protective of me. She knew I was queer. She could see by the signs, because I used to love cinching my figure. Like my belt had to be so tight, my figure had to pop. And she was always teasing me like, "Oh, Rafika, you always want to show your figure." And other things. And we would play dress up with my mother, and she would adorn me with her bangles and makeup and lipstick. And I had this beautiful experience. And people would say to her, "Oh my gosh, what are you doing to the kid? You're getting the kid in there." And she was like, "It's just dress up. Don't take yourself so seriously." So I had a beautiful relationship where, my queerness was embraced. But more than that, there was a sense of her being protective, of knowing that the world would not be receptive of who I was. And so in the very early bits, when I go to school, she tells me, warns me against the world, like, be careful, don't let people talk to you, say nasty things to you, don't let people touch you inappropriately. And when she had said that, I hadn't known why she was so worried about me. But when I got into the world and I experienced the hate and the violence, then I started realizing that, people don't approve of who I am. But that the fact that I had been validated and affirmed rather, from home by my mother, meant that I could take on the violence and discrimination outside with a bit more, with a thicker skin, knowing that at home I was a valuable human being, regardless of being different. So I know that it's not the experience of a lot of people to have this kind of experience. But I was thinking, perhaps I was talking to a friend recently who had also lost their mom, and we were asking, would things be different? Some growing up, perhaps the queerness would have been a bigger issue between me and my mom. But I really believe that if she was around, we would be having the best of times. We would be best friends and be partying and together and having this beautiful expression of, mother and son with the queerness relations vibes. Something I was always really looking forward to. So I think my experience was a loving one. And I don't take that for granted. And particularly coming from, the township and from a Black communities, like the expectation is always that there's homophobia, there's violence that you experience. But I thought it was important to also highlight the kind of loving elements without, of course, romanticizing the fact that there was discrimination outside of the relationship with my mom.
I mean, I think it's really beautiful because, many of us want to have had that relationship with our parents, right? Or our primary caregivers, in order to kind of build you up to be like who you are. You are just perfect as you are, right? But I think, Alistair, you explore something a little bit different to what Welcome has just told us. Tell us a little bit more about the relationship, I suppose, between Viwe and his mom, but particularly with the entrance of Lutando, like just how that relationship played out.
Sure. So, Welcome, that relationship with your mother is so, so beautiful. And as Letlhogonolo has said, I think so many of us wish that we had had that. The dynamic that I explore it doesn't have to be this way with Viwe in particular, is that Viwe he struggles a lot with his sexuality, and he was raised in a very conservative background, which a lot of us can relate to. And his mother, unfortunately, it's a very different dynamic to the one you've just described, Welcome. His mom is very religious and she's very conservative. And even though she believes she's doing the right thing for him, it often plays out as cruelty. And he believes that she doesn't love him for who he is. And so when she dies in the book, his grief is sort of almost poisoned with this sense of like needing to prove himself and proving that he deserved her love, because he never felt like he got her love, and he never felt like he did enough to earn it. And that in turn sort of ruins his relationship with Lutando, who is his partner at the time. And it brings up a lot of his stuff from his childhood, where he felt like he had to earn people's love and earn people's respect. And he had to try and suppress a part of himself so that he could be loved, and so that he was a good person. Whereas Lutando is on a much more, he's on a different journey in terms of, he doesn't really let that stuff get to him in the same way. He's able to shake it off in a way that I really admire, and I wish I could do it. But he lets the sort of homophobia wash off him, and he knows that he's a worthwhile human being just for being alive and for being who he is. But it makes his relationship with Viwe very difficult, because Viwe is, he finds it very hard to be in a relationship with a man. You know, he doesn't think that it's approved of, and that it's going to that other people respect it. So yeah, so his grief is very difficult for him. I think often grief is very difficult with a person that you have a hard relationship with, because you're mourning the loss of that person while also feeling maybe angry, and also feeling really like you don't know what to do to prove your worth.
It's really fascinating that you say that, right? Because I think that in many ways, Viwe realizes that he couldn't be where he is without Lutando, right? So I think about their first kiss, and it feels like Viwe was like, yeah, this is how a first kiss was always meant to be, right? Before we go to kind of like queer love and sort of the intricacies in queer love, two questions I kind of want to ask you, Alistair, and then I'll come to you, to kind of tease out a little bit of Boy on the Run. I mean, positionality is really important, particularly in literature, right? And like, while we have queer representation, we're also thinking about the different ways in which we're privileged or we are oppressed, right? And as a white person who's writing this novel about climate justice, particularly basing it in Cape Town and having the people at the forefront be like Black protagonists, right? Like, I was really fascinated when I read, and I was like, okay, like, why are these Black folks, right? And I mean, obviously you have Malcolm, who's white, so there are white people in the book. But I wanted to know particularly why it was important for you to talk about like kind of climate justice, why climate justice was like the lens in which you were telling this queer story, but also why it was important for Black people to be protagonists in the story.
Sure. So I guess there's a lot of reasons for that. I guess the first is that I think anything climate related has in the past been seen as a very middle class concern, and I don't think it is. And I think now more and more people are realizing that it isn't that. But climate justice is a form of social justice, because it's the people who haven't really caused this crisis who are going to be the first who are going to suffer the worst consequences and the earliest consequences. And we already see this, with flooding and droughts and all of these things. And the rich are able to some extent to protect themselves from that, which is a dynamic that I explore in the book. And Cape Town becomes even more unequal and more divided than it currently is, which is of course already quite dystopian. A lot of South African cities have dystopian levels of inequality. And so it was important for me to explore both sides of that unequal divide. So there is the Malcolm character, as you mentioned. One of the three main characters is a white guy, and he's much more privileged than the others, and he is able to withdraw into a sort of high-tech bubble, essentially. But that journey for him also doesn't really end in any sense of meaning or any sense of happiness. And I think it's such a difficult issue because I understand that white writers writing Black characters, it's got a horrible history, and there's so much that can go wrong with it. But I think it's even stranger if you are South African to write a book only centered on white people. I find that quite a strange concept to wrap my head around. And I wanted to explore all of these social dynamics sort of on both sides of the spectrum, in terms of privilege and access to resources and access to the ability to protect yourself from the climate stuff that's coming. And so, yeah, I think it was important for me to be able to have some Black characters in this book that people resonate with and love. And so for me, it just became a question of how do you do that in a way that is respectful, and so that the characters are completely whole, rounded human beings and not caricatures. And yeah, I guess, sorry, I don't know if I feel like I've wandered off on my own thought process there. I'm not sure if that answers your question at all.
Been completely perfect. Welcome. Okay. I really like the title of your book, right? Like Boy on the Run. And I wanted to know like why boy on the run, right? Like, because I think about like a lot of what the book is, it's, you don't invite us in as voyagers to your grief, right? We're like friends who sit with you next to the grief, right? So we're not running with you in essence, right? We're kind of like walking with you. So I was really fascinated about like, why Boy on the Run, why the title Boy on the Run?
Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned a bit earlier that it was kind of an escape from grief, you know, and I think I had the moment I realized that I think this was the book, this was the title, or the idea that I was on the run happened to me. I don't think I wrote this, but I was living in Cape Town, working for Getaway magazine, a travel magazine. And I used to take the train to work. And I wanted to come to Joburg. I was feeling so sad and miserable in Cape Town, and I was missing my friends, and I was miserable. And I remember just how melancholic the train rides used to be, and how I felt. I would look out of the train and into people's eyes, trying to find something that would make me less heavy, that would make this grief, this pain go away. And in this moving train and looking at everyone sitting in that train, seeing how sad everyone was in one way or another, how people were carrying their own pain. And I remember realizing in that moment that, oh my gosh, there is no way I can escape this feeling, this pain. It's something I have to sit with, and that was such a big pivotal moment for me, because that's when I made a decision to say, actually, you know what, I'm going to move back to Joburg, which is where I wanted to be, and whatever happens, I'll deal with the consequences of that. And so I felt like, and just prior to that moment, I had been trying to escape pain. And I mean, I'm a very energetic person. I have a lot of hobbies, or a lot of different things I can immerse myself into. And that became a way for me to, instead of sitting with this pain, I'd rather bake a pie or crochet or make something, read a book, anything to get out of my head. Because the image of my mother laying in that puddle of blood is something I have not been able to escape. And it's something I have been wanting to escape, And so having people sit through me, with me through this grief, is to also show, I think I tried to show that this has been something I am trying to escape. And in some ways, there are healthy ways of saying I'm going to escape the grief, and the friendships I encounter and the writing that I do, and all these things become ways for me to save myself and really escape the pain of grief, but while also, dealing with it. And writing this book was also a significant part of sitting with this grief and realizing that there is no running away from it. So when the run is actually more, I suppose, about realizing that there is no running away from the pain and the violence that I experience of trying to also find myself as a queer man and overcoming the sneers and the stares that people always give us when they see our flamboyant, fabulous selves rolling down the street.
Yeah. Another really kind of fascinating thing that I think both books do is really tap into this idea of the politics of desirability and belonging, right? So, Alistair, I think about like the relationship between Viwe and Lutando, and I think particularly about like kind of what you've spoken about like, Lutando was thinking about Viwe not like appreciating and loving his femininity, right? At some instances, he's just like, actually, you know what, it's a little bit too much. You gotta pull it back, you gotta pull it back.
Yeah.
And I think about like kind of that desirability within the context of a relationship, right? Like how that played out and why it was important for you to kind of, I suppose in reality, put forth, right, the kind of desirability politics that exist in the queer space, right? So no offense, type of hashtags, right? And welcome, I think, like just once Alistair has done that, to kind of take us through your journey, because I think a lot of the book is also that, right? You saying you've had to really sit down with yourself and be like, hey, babes, I'm fabulous. And like, but what that means in terms of dating, because you are leaning into this femininity, right? Alistair?
Sure. So I think for me, it's just one of the most heartbreaking things about being queer and at the queer community, that even once you've come out and even once you've accepted yourself to that extent that you're able to tell people and you're able to talk about it, there's still so much internalized damage that I'm hoping younger generations are more free from than we were. But in the case of the Beware character, you know, there's a lot of queer people out there have internalized a lot of that shame and a lot of that hatred and try really hard to be as mask as possible and to like pass as straight, and then often continue to inflict damage, not just on themselves and that hatred on themselves, but on their partners who maybe are less bound by that, you know. So Luthando is more free to express himself, and he is more femme, and that's so sort of inspiring and beautiful, and yet it makes Beware so uncomfortable because he's still struggling with this idea that he's not quite, you know, manly enough because he's a queer man. So I guess I was just interested in that exploration, and I almost wanted to show straight readers in a way what it's like to internalize so much of that hatred and what it can do to a person, and then when it explodes and spills out of someone so that it's visible, you know, because so much of it is invisible. A lot of that damage is invisible and we just carry it along with us. So I guess the counterbalance to that was the Luthando character, who is able to sort of triumph over that and just love himself. But it's a journey throughout the book. He struggles a lot in the beginning as well.
And I think, like, kind of what you say, although Luthando is someone who loves himself and is like not fazed by all of this, right? It really impacts the interpersonal relationships, right? So like kind of the way in which their romantic relationship plays out is impacted by this kind of internalized shame that is being projected onto him, right? And so, like, in many instances, while he can be himself, he can't fully be himself in front of Beware because of just how much the internalization has happened. So I thought that was just a beautiful kind of like juxtaposition of like really the kind of ideas of the politics of belonging that exist in the queer community, particularly the gay community, right? Welcome. You also speak about this in your book, right? A large part of the book is kind of like this idea of like, damn, man, it's hard being a gay man, right? Who is femme, and how do you navigate those spaces? Do you want to talk to us a little bit more about like, you know, kind of your musings on the idea of the politics of belonging and desirability, but also why it was important for you to kind of put that as part of your memoir?
Yeah, you know, I think when people see fearless, proud and flamboyant queens, they think it's so easy, you know, and you know, it should cost $1 billion to look this good.
But you make it look so easy because you got it.
You know, like it looks easy. It looks easy to be like, I'm gonna, you know, wear my flower crown, I'm gonna wear my lipstick and my nails into that boardroom and go to meetings with all these important people and show up fully as myself. That has been so hard. And I think because of the love I mentioned earlier I'd received from my mother, I felt I didn't have to tuck myself away, you know, because I was loved as I was by my mother. So when I went out into the streets, I always felt compelled to stay true to that self, you know, that I felt myself to be. And in some ways I belonged. It felt like I belonged to myself from a young age in a way. And coming into that is difficult. Coming into that fact for yourself is difficult, given the messaging of religion the media lack of representation and the misrepresentation of queerness, and the smirks you get at school, in the hood, everywhere we go. It makes it so hard to reconcile what we already know in our hearts, that we are beautiful as we are, you know? So it really took me a while. And as you were talking about Luthando and how easy it is, and you were saying it's still a journey for him, you know, I recognize that every day, the process of coming out, someone probably has said, it's a constant thing. Every day you have to make a decision to say, I'm going to show up fully as myself, you know? And I think the important thing we can really be is belong, you know, as Audrey says, deeply to ourselves. And I think that's something I'm committed to holding on to, because to let ourselves be shaped by people's expectations of us is only going to diminish our beauty, our, you know, fabulosity, and power, really, because there is power in who we are. And so romantically, I do realize that, you know, being out there like that does mean, like she's a raving queen, stay away from her. I mean, I feel like I've experienced that. Like the whole idea of being too much is a real thing, you know, and I have embraced my too muchness. Like I am too much, and hashtag team too much. and if I'm going to be I can only be with people who appreciate and value that part of that about me, and my friends, my family, you know, have never really made me feel to be too much. So I think part of it, in terms of belonging and the kind of communities we create for ourselves, means that we are able to draw lines of the kind of treatment we deserve. And again, that's not easy when we don't have a model for how to do this. But I think the model should really start with how we feel as individuals, how we feel really as individuals who belong to ourselves. Like, because everything I do has to make me feel like, yes, I belong to myself, and I consent. I agree that I can go through this, you know? And I'm committed to staying true to that, to myself, to my expression of that self as I view it, and as something I know constantly changes. Like sometimes I'm like, I feel like being a daddy, you know? And that's okay. And that's okay. There's many aspects to who I am. And that's a powerful thing instead of something to be ashamed of.
Yeah, man. I think what both kind of books do overtly is talk about friendship, and it's just reminded me of something that Jose Esteban Munoz said, right? So Jose says, queer friendship has proven to be the condition of possibility for imagination of what queerness can and should mean, right? And I feel like in many instances, when I think about like kind of the ways in which both books come out, right? It's like, just like that, what queerness can and should be, right? And I want to be a little bit controversial, right? And say this, right? So we know that kind of it doesn't have to be this way, that Malcolm and Luthando kind of were a thing, but not a thing, but they're friends, right? And you know, often queer people are like, but are they really your friend if you haven't had a thing with them, right? And I want to speak a little bit about like kind of the beauty of queer friendships, right? But also just like that kind of queer intimacy that is not necessarily platonic, but it's also not entirely sexual. So to speak about that, right? Welcome, you speak a lot about like the beauty and the kind of saving grace of queer friendships, right? But I believe in some instances of it that is tainted with a little bit of like sensuality and platonicness, right? So I want both your reflections just in general, like, you know, building up from the book about this kind of queer intimacies that isn't completely platonic.
So So I guess in the case of my book, I think Malcolm is sort of in love with Luthando, and so that does complicate things a little bit, and I think he realizes that as the book goes on. But I love this. I love what you're getting at, and I think it's true, and I think it's one of the most beautiful things about being queer, because I know from a lot of straight friends that there's this sort of belief, widespread belief in the straight community that, you know, men and women can't be friends, you know, because there's always a bit of sexual tension, and it's just such a strange and sad belief system to have, you know, because I think there's amazing opportunities to love people and to maybe there's a sexual vibe there every now and then. Maybe there are exes, maybe you've just fooled around with them every now and then, but it doesn't mean you have to, like, you know, that it's not like an either or situation. I think the boundaries are quite gray and quite blurred between romantic love and friendship. And I think people can mean a lot to you and you have a sexual history, but it doesn't just mean they're exes, you know. It's like, I don't know, I think it's one of the best things about being queer. I think it's a beautiful, fruitful area of human relationships.
Yeah.
Well,
Yes, I'm gonna have to agree that I think the real beauty of queerness is that we get to redefine and define for ourselves, you know, what intimacy, what friendship, what community looks like. And that's really a beautiful thing. We should really hold on to that we are, the idea of not having a model shouldn't devastate us so much as it should inspire us, you know. And so for me, my friendship with Mvuyo, who's my best friend, whom I write you know, quite prominently about in the book, we used to even joke that, oh my gosh, everyone thinks we're dating because we're always together. We love each other so much. And we even vowed that, oh my gosh, if we're 40 and we're both single, let's just get married and live together and happily ever after because we love each other. So in our case, it was a matter of we adored each other so much that it wasn't sexual, but the intimacy was very deep, and you know, and it was a new experience of friendship for me because you know, queerness is something we always have to, when we are finding ourselves, it's difficult to find people who can not only embrace themselves, but, you know, embrace the other person who's also queer. So this friendship I had with Mvuyo was quite a deep and intimate experience for me that made me realize, and we you know, kept thinking of how we could define for ourselves what the boundaries of that intimacy should be, and that we weren't supposed to be limited or constrained to patriarchal ideas, or that if we wanted to get married and start our own family in ways that did not fit the model of what a nuclear family should be, or even a monogamous sexual experience, you know. So I think the power of friendships, particularly queer friendships, and I think it's so sad that a lot of heterosexual people don't get to experience intimacy with straight men together. I think women generally tend to have a better experience than men, but I think cishet men, that they miss out on this deep intimacy that we as queer folk get to experience with one another. And I long for that, and I value those kinds of friendships because they make me realize that we get to define for ourselves how deeply we want to love one another.
I love that. Welcome. Sorry.
No, you can go ahead.
I really love what Welcome's been saying, and I think that's one of the most beautiful things about queer friendships is that it's so healing, you know, because we say we need to learn to love ourselves, but it's quite hard to do that on your own. And if you are having this deep intimacy with a group of friends who adore you and like doesn't care how camp and femme you are, you know, it lets you redefine your own relationship with yourself, which I think is really wonderful.
And also just to quickly add to that, it's like, I just thought as you were saying that, like, how I love that, you know, seeing my friends being their queer selves, you know, when so queer and so femme and fabulous and flamboyant in ways that would be frowned upon. Like, I get so happy when I see my girls like that. I'm like, and by loving them in their, you know, uniqueness, I also realize that I'm loving myself, you know, because by appreciating how fabulous your nails are and how you carry yourself and dance and move. By appreciating that about you, I also appreciate and accept it for myself.
Absolutely.
I wanted to be a little bit naughty and
Go for it.
and ask, I mean, to both of you, right? Like, what do you think about platonic cuddles?
You go first. Welcome.
Platonic cuddles. I mean, I had and I do write about the traumatic incidents I had as a kid when I had a group of boys, sexually attack, assault me when I was very young. And for the longest time, that did make me kind of averse to being touched, I could only be touched in environments that were within my control. I love hugs because that's easier. That's like huggies, we keep it moving. But I've come to also overcome that. So I let myself overcome that because I didn't want to let the experience, the violent experience, rob my joy from the how profound and deep human touch can be and can go towards deepening intimacy. And so it's something I'm really working through, to let myself be touched and loved in all ways, in deep ways, and by my friends. Like, to have it's so funny because the other day I was out with a friend and it was a bit cold at night, and a friend was like, oh my gosh, can I just wrap my arms around you? And we were out and about, and I was just like, I don't know. And they're like, oh, come on, please. And they made their puppy face, and I just ended up giving into it. And it was a beautiful experience. Like, just us sitting there, putting my arms around them was a sweet experience. And she was like, oh my gosh, this was so cool. It wasn't, of course, forced, but it was like, a little hug, let me hold your hand or something. And I had to have a moment with myself, like, why am I afraid of this? And I certainly think that the conditioning, the homophobia and patriarchy in terms of how they've controlled human relations and human touch, and over-sexualized human touch is the reason many of us are so averse to proximity, to people touching us, because we've just over-sexualized everything so much. And I think it is very important that we start stepping out of that and value intimacy without over-sexualizing these beautiful experiences that can help us deepen various forms of intimacy, particularly like friendship.
Mm-hmm.
I love everything you just said. I don't think I can even really add anything to that. But I guess in principle, I'm like a big fan in theory of platonic cuddles. I'm also struggling on my journey to get there. I think in my case, it's more just a little bit like me, where I went to a very toxic boarding school, very patriarchal boarding school, and there's still this like initial like knee-jerk reaction every time I want to hug a guy, usually a male person. There's usually this thing like, oh my god, they're gonna know I'm gay, and then I have to like, oh, obviously, there's a lot of damage there to unpack. I find it easier with my girlfriends to be physically intimate in a way that doesn't feel like it's crossing any boundaries. But I love the idea of platonic cuddles. I think I wish as a culture we were more open to that idea.
I think also the no homo phrase,
Yeah.
is also part of like, hey, careful, hey, don't step, don't go too much type thing, or overstep. And I think we must be careful of even making those jokes, because it's like, it's a joke, but it's still like, yo.
I feel like, yeah, there are things that we often reinforce, right, as queer folks, right? So we talk often about, oh, that's the beauty of being queer. We can define and we can redefine, but we end up reinforcing a lot of what we say the culture we don't want to be a part of, right? And even sometimes subtly Like it's not as explicit as you would like it to be, but like as Alistair has just indicated, right? It's like I find it more comfortable to hug certain people in the public eye, right? And often it's not like that you are not out, right? Or that you're not living your truth. It's just like, I just don't want to feel the kind of pressure that I'm placing on myself around like what I'm supposed to be, like the right type of queer, right? Or the very close aligned, straight passing type of queer, right? Before I open up for questions, I mean, I have many, but one of the things I wanted to ask both of you is, what do you hope that your book will do in the world, right? Now that it's out and, you know, it's no longer in your head, right? Or in your spirit, it's now out in the world. What do you hope that it's going to do, particularly for queer folks?
So I guess for me, this book was, it's sort of equal parts a queer book and a climate book. So I guess there's both sets of like goals and hopes are associated with that. I guess aside from the climate and hoping to scare people enough that they do something about that. I heard a beautiful phrase the other day, which is called positive panic, which I love, which is like, you got to scare your readers enough that they take it seriously, but not so much that they feel apathetic about it or hopeless. But from a like, aside from the climate angle, I think I would love for people who aren't, I mean, sorry, I'm not being very eloquent here. I think I hope that queer readers pick it up and recognize a bit of themselves in the characters and can see themselves and love themselves in the characters and recognize a lot of the struggles that we go through. I also, someone came up to me at one of the launches in Johannesburg who was not a queer person, and she was very almost surprised. I don't think she had noticed that it was a queer book until she picked it up. And then once she had read it, she said to me, and this sounds so problematic, but it didn't come from a hateful place at all. She was just like, I'd never really thought that, you know, gay people were people, and I'd only ever seen them as like, I know, I see your face, but she explained it, and she was like, you only ever see them as sort of caricatures, you know, and I never really got inside the head of a queer person. And so I guess for me, that was actually such a beautiful moment, and I loved that. I hope that it helps spread some understanding and some compassion and some humanity for maybe people who are not necessarily reading queer literature to start off with, that it could open their eyes and open their hearts. Yeah, and I guess for queer readers to see themselves in the book, and for it to not to be a huge deal, you know, because it should be normal to have queer characters in novels. I don't know, it shouldn't be this othering thing.
See, I think for me, that's why I'm a little bit surprised that someone would say, just I didn't used to see them as people. I'm like, anyways, you know what, right along. Welcome, what about you?
I think you've said some really wonderful things that certainly resonate with what I hope Boy on the Run will do, you know, and that is, I hope queer folk, especially Black queer folk, can see themselves and love themselves, like you said, through these pages. And yeah, because, you know, growing up, there weren't that much, you know, not only role models, but narratives and stories about us, about ourselves, and helping us imagine what a free life could be as a queer person, and being validated in our challenges and experiences. So I really hope that this book makes people feel less alone in their struggle to live their truth, in their struggle with grief, and, you know, in their struggle with love, because I really believe that we suffer more deeply when we think we are alone in our struggles. And my hope is that anyone who picks up this book feels less alone, and that, you know, they have a friend in me in this book.
You have a friend in me. Dash, I just wanted to find out if there's any comments or questions from Facebook before we kind of wrap up. So I think I wanted to add a little bit of like what I thought about both books, right? I mean, obviously you can see I love them because like I can't stop raving about them. But I had written something about Boy on the Run, and I just want to read it, just a little bit of it. I said, Boy on the Run invites us to celebrate queer people's daily realities in relation to the politics of desirability, belonging, the intimacy of touch and dating. At the same time, it moves us to ruminate on the possibility of queer friendships and soft landings that they can tender. A moving, tenderly written, achingly sad memoir about a traumatic event in the journey of becoming and unbecoming on the path of healing. And this is what I had to say about
Beautiful, thank you.
It doesn't have to be that way. I said, what a timely read, rich, thought-provoking, and harrowing. The characters will stay with me after I finish reading this book. Questions about climate have really been interesting because I don't think we think about it enough. The relationships about queer grief, about homosexual, heterosexual friendship relationships was really something beautiful to read. Harrowing as it is, it doesn't have to be that way, is truly revolutionary. So that's what I thought about both books.
Thank you.
That it's absolutely wonderful. Okay, so someone asked, where can we get these books? Any bookstore that you want to go to, but if you want to shameless plug, you can just email info@cheekynatives.co.za or follow Cheeky Natives online and just say, Cheeky Natives, hook me up with the books and then we will make it happen for you. We can even do that at a discount because, you know, we love book readers, particularly everyone who just supports writers in this country. But really, truly welcome. And Alistair, thank you really so much for writing. I think that writing is often a very solitary and lonesome process, right? And in many instances, what I hope is that people will pick up this book and, you know, kind of enjoy your labor of love. And I hope that more books are to come, maybe more salacious, because I love salacious books. I just think that we don't write enough about our sex. And I'm just like, everything, you know, from start to finish, let there be sex. And also kind of the embarrassing moments, right? Like, I mean, welcome, the moment where you're reading about the hookup was really honest, right? You think about like, these are also kind of the things that queer people have to go through that like often cishet people, yes, they do go through, but they don't have to. You know, you can go into a grocery store or a bar, whatever, and meet someone. Unfortunately, for many of us, like it's not that easy. You just can't show up in a bar and be like, "Hey, Queens is taking me home tonight." You know, it doesn't work like that. I suppose, yes, Bash. Oh, wonderful. Oh, tender. Okay, so what inspires you both?
Go for it.
What inspires me? Yeah, I think I'm inspired by by our resilience as queer people, you know. I think we underestimate just how strong we are. The fact that we are still here standing joyful and beautiful and powerful despite the world wanting us erased from, you know, being part of the human race. And there's so much violence that's going on the continent everywhere against queer people. We experience so much violence and discrimination. And even with all of that, we are still committed to being true to ourselves, you know. So for some people, it might seem like we don't have to. We can just, you know, conform and do things by the book as we're expected to, and not have to face the kind of harsh treatments that comes with living our truth. But I am deeply inspired by how committed we are as queer people to living our truths. And I see it every time I feel like I'm a bit wary of the violence I experience in the world. I just have to look out into my, sisters and fellow queens and see y'all shining and be reminded that, oh my gosh, we are in this. Aluta continua for real, So I'm inspired by us. I'm inspired by our resilience. And we are fighting a very serious fight. And we are serious about fighting that serious fight. And I love that for us.
And I suppose just to answer the next question, right? What are you currently reading?
What I'm currently reading, I'm gonna be honest, I did say I'm finishing It Doesn't Have to Be This Way, and it is so beautifully written. Like, I would encourage everyone to get it. It's so beautifully written. The characters come to life in such a way that makes me feel hugged and seen. And so a big thank you, Alistair, for this. And I really can't wait to get through to it and link up and talk some more books.
Amazing.
Alistair,
Thank you. Welcome.
what inspires you?
I think in a similar vein, I think I'm very inspired by queer people finding their voices. I think more and more there are more queer stories out there, more queer narratives. I think there's an amazing abundance of like writers are coming to the fore and shows that are being produced. So I think, I'm inspired by the resilience that we've shown as a community, and that there does seem to be a creative flourishing. I think there's a bit of a renaissance happening in South Africa and the world. I take a lot of inspiration from that. I also, I suppose, as is evident in the themes of this book, I also feel very inspired by nature when I feel a bit overwhelmed and I feel I'm too in my own head and I'm too anxious. Then going for a walk, in a forest or something really, really helps calm me down, and that really helps my creative process. I guess those are the main things that inspire me. Other amazing storytellers inspire me.
And what are you reading currently?
I mean, this sounds like a mutual plug. I'm reading Welcome's book at the moment, which I'm also loving. But I've also just finished this book called Gay Bar, which I'm finding very, very interesting. It's an American book, and it's kind of part memoir, part history of gay bars throughout, mostly London and the US. But I'm really enjoying that. It's an interesting hybrid of a book, gay history and memoir, and it's very salacious. Letlhogonolo, you would love it.
And then there was a third question. I suppose the third question was, what books can a 9-year-old read? I don't know if you have any recommendations, Welcome or Alistair. I will say, Bash, whoever asked the question can just DM me and I can send them a list of books. There's just too much to name right now. So they can DM me. But if you have any recommendations, please, you can go ahead.
Unfortunately, I don't really know much about books that 9-year-olds would love. I'm not sure.
I think you're on mute, Welcome.
I think you're on mute, Welcome.
Yes, thank you. I was saying, it's such a tricky question, because it's like, okay, I suppose if it's salacious, does that mean kids shouldn't read? The salacious part, I'm always like, so I don't know. But I think as a kid, I appreciated being exposed to things that really did challenge my perception of what I thought the world was supposed to be. So I think Letlhogonolo is probably best to give a recommendation.
Because I have children.
All the books.
Before I go, I just wanted to thank you both, and thank you to Time of the Writer for giving us this wonderful opportunity to commune and really talk about queer representation in literature. I hope you both have flourishing lives filled with lots of salaciousness. And I hope that we get to read more from you in the future. Thank you very much, Welcome, and thank you very much, Alistair.
And thank you.
Yeah. Yes, thank you so much. Thank you. I love this. Absolutely love this talk. Yes, it's beautiful.
And to everyone, please continue to watch Time of the Writer Conversations online. And if you're in Durban, to continue to attend the events, and also buy lots of books. That's really important, to buy lots and lots of books. There is a difference between reading books and buying books. Those are two separate hobbies, and it's okay to do both. Bash, over to you.